Yes, ma'am. French Richie. French Richie. Okay. And he has heart problems. Okay, so tell me, Coy, French Richie has heart problems? Pulmonary problems. And is this just a friend or what? You know him from Brahms. Oh, you know him from Good Samaritan. He goes to North Prom. Oh, you saw him at Brahms. I'm here in North Park and Brahms and something. Yeah, okay. Okay. You saw him in Brahms Sunday night. He has pulmonary problems. He goes to North Park, and you know him from Good Samaritan. Hey, all right. I feel like I'm on a game show sometime. I'll have friends of Coy for 2,000, Bob. Okay, all right. Well, let's take a look at Acts tonight as we continue our adventures with Paul through the book of Acts. We're going to be in chapter 19 of Acts tonight, if you want to find your place there. We last left Paul in Ephesus on his third missionary journey. I gave you a handout tonight that I thought was very helpful. Somebody asked me earlier on, Brother Mark, will you tell us, like, when we get to certain points in Acts where Paul wrote different letters, will you tell us where he wrote those? And I said, yes, I will. And so I found this really cool chart that kind of outlines where Paul was when he wrote the different letters of the New Testament, which missionary journey he was on, the approximate date, and from where. Now, some of them were more certain than others, so it's not an exact thing, but it's pretty close. And so if you notice, Paul's in Ephesus now on his third missionary journey, and so you see that's where he would have written the book of 1 Corinthians in the spring of 57 AD. That's an approximate date, but that's, pretty close. So anyway, hang on to this. You'll find that helpful as you go through in your own New Testament studies, and when you get to the book of Thessalonians or whatever, you may say, well, now, where was Paul and what was he doing when he wrote that? And you'll have a pretty good resource for that. Then I wanted to tell you something else that I think will help you in your New Testament studies, because it's very easy to get lost and confused in all of the places that's mentioned in Acts and all the places that's mentioned in the New Testament in Paul's letters and all that. So I just kind of, if you can memorize, I know you're not going to memorize a whole lot of things, but if you memorize this and remember this, it will help you in your New Testament studies. Anytime in the New Testament, Acts or any of the Paul's letters, you read something about Asia, it's talking about Asia Minor, which is in modern-day Turkey. And remember, Ephesus is the primary city of Asia Minor. And also in Asia Minor, we're dealing with the 7 letters that are written in Revelation. So we're talking about places like Thyatira, Laodicea, Philadelphia, all of those Asia Minor cities, but primarily we're talking about Ephesus. If something is said about Macedonia, we're talking about the northern part of modern-day Greece. And so we're talking primarily about cities like Philippi, cities like Thessalonica, cities like Berea. That's Macedonia in the northern part of Greece. Then if you read anything about Achaia, that's in the southern part of what would be modern-day Greece. And the primary city in Achaia would have been Corinth. So anytime you read Achaia, you know you're talking about Corinth or the area around Corinth. So if you can kind of remember that, it will help you where if you're reading along and Paul is talking about Macedonia, you go, okay, northern Greece. We're talking about Philippi. We're talking about Thessalonica. If Paul says he stays behind in Asia, he's talking about Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, and we're talking about probably Ephesus. Does that make sense? That help? All right, with that in mind, let's take a look at verse 21 of Acts chapter 19, where we left off last time. When these things were accomplished, Paul purposed in the Spirit when he had passed through Macedonia. Now, where is that? Northern Greece, and we're talking about what cities primarily? Philippi, Thessalonica, and Achaia. Achaia, we're talking primarily about what city? Corinth. To go to Jerusalem. That's not in either of those. That's in Palestine. Saying, after I have been there, I must also see Rome. So he sent into Macedonia 2 of those who ministered to him, Timothy and Erastus, but he himself stayed in Asia for a time. So Asia, we're talking about Asia Minor, and we're talking about what city? Ephesus. So he's staying behind in Ephesus. Now, something is going to happen in Ephesus that we'll get to in just a little bit, but Paul he's made up his mind. He's going on to Jerusalem and on to Rome, but he's going to spend some time in Ephesus first. Now, what was Paul's purpose in going to Jerusalem? Well, he not necessarily this time. He's trying to he's delivering a collection for the church at Jerusalem. Jerusalem was going through hard times, and some of the churches of Macedonia had taken up a love offering for them, and Paul was delivering them. We get details of this in Romans chapter 15. I thought I'd just share that with you briefly. In Romans 15, 25, Paul says, "But now I'm going to Jerusalem to minister to the saints, for it pleased those from Macedonia and Achaia to make a certain contribution for the poor among the saints who are in Jerusalem. It pleased them indeed, and they are their debtors, for if the Gentiles have been partakers of their spiritual things, their duty is also to minister to them in material things." In other words, the churches of Macedonia, they wanted to help their sister church at Jerusalem, so they took up this love offering. "Therefore, when I have performed this and have sealed to them this fruit, I shall go by the way of you to Spain. But I know that when I come to you, I shall come in the fullness of the blessing of the gospel of Christ. I beg you, brethren, through the Lord Jesus Christ and through the love of the Spirit, that you strive together with me in prayers to God for me, that I may be delivered from those in Judea who do not believe, and that my service for Jerusalem may be acceptable to the saints." So he's basically writing to the church at Rome to tell them his plans to deliver this love offering to Jerusalem, and then to go on to Rome. And so his face is set now towards Jerusalem and Rome, where eventually he will be killed for his faith. Who does that sound like? Sounds a lot like Jesus, who set his face towards Jerusalem. Uh, so Paul is going to Jerusalem, but before he gets out of Ephesus, another thing happens. I don't know what to say. Another thing is instigated. So let's take a look at this, verse 23. About that time, there arose a great commotion about the way. And again, now here's another New Testament thing. Anytime you see a reference to the way, it's talking about Christianity. At first, they weren't called Christians. They weren't called Christians until Antioch. The church in Antioch, they were first called Christians, but originally it was called the way, probably tying back into Jesus' words, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Verse 24, for a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith who made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation and said, men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. Moreover, you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods which are made with hands. So, not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised, and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. Okay, so this riot is going to take place with Paul. These silversmiths are going to get all worked up over the fact that Paul is preaching that these idols are not really gods. And so there's going to be this great dispute, and it's going to spill out over into and eventually come to a head at the theater in Ephesus. Now let's take a look. I got a couple of pictures here. This is a statue of the goddess Artemis. This is in Ephesus. And you can see, I don't know why anybody would want to worship that thing, but apparently they did, and they believed it was the goddess Artemis. Let's see the next picture. Oh yeah, this is the temple. This is what's left of the temple of Artemis. Just one pillar and part of another. But at one time it was magnificent. We'll see in the video kind of a artist recreation of what it would have looked like. It was like one of the wonders of the ancient world. I mean, it was amazing. But that's what was driving these silversmiths to find fault with Paul. So Artemis was the Greek name. Diana was the Roman name. So I don't know if your translation will say Artemis or if it'll say Diana. I don't know. It depends on what translation you're using, but they're one and the same. Diana would have been the Roman version of it. Artemis would have been the Greek version of it. The goddess of nature and fertility. And this is important because her temple was in Ephesus. In fact, they believe that her image fell from heaven, that Zeus threw her image down from heaven, and Ephesus was the city that was in charge of protecting her and her worship and her temple and all of this. So it all stems very deep in Ephesus. It all centers in Ephesus. You read about, read the letter of Paul to the Ephesians, or you read in Revelation about Christ's words to the church at Ephesus, and you start to think about all they had to deal with and how deeply rooted idolatry was there. So Demetrius is the one that leads this attack. He's opposed to Paul's preaching. And he's opposed to Paul's preaching really for three main reasons. One was an economic reason. In verse 24, he says that this has brought us no small profit. In other words, if people start believing the gospel and they start turning away from idols, then we stand to lose a lot of money because we make the idols that they worship. He had a religious reason that he states, and that is that Diana would be despised, or Artemis would be despised. In other words, this was their religion, this was their faith. And you wouldn't want, I don't even know how to liken it, but if someone came in and was disparaging Jesus and was saying, Jesus is nothing, and was preaching it from the streets, you would probably be a little bit perturbed about that, or maybe a lot of bit perturbed about that. Well, they believed this stuff. They believed that Diana was a goddess, and their city was her protector and the seat of her temple and all of this stuff. And so it was a big deal to them. And then there was a social / civic reason, because Ephesus was the center of Diana worship. And so it brought a lot of trade into Ephesus. A lot of people came to Ephesus on pilgrimage because it was the center for Diana worship, for Artemis worship. And so, it would hurt the whole city, they felt like, if people turned away from Diana, or if Diana was somehow proven to be untrue. Now, my question to you is, put on your thinking caps a little bit tonight. Are any of those same issues stumbling blocks to people today for coming to Christ? Yeah, exactly. I mean, the same things that were stumbling blocks in those days are stumbling blocks today. Certainly economic. I mean, there are many places in the world, probably not so much America, but many places in the world where if you let it be known that you're a Christian, you can lose your job, you can be, ostracized, you can be separated from your family. I mean, it's all kinds of stuff. You're religious, and in America, religion can get in the way of the gospel, and it happens a lot. Church I pastored in East Tennessee, there was a young man. He was probably maybe 18, 19, 20, somewhere in there. And you could just tell, like every Sunday he was under conviction. You could just tell. And one day he came down, and tears in his eyes, and he told me, he said, Brother Mark, I was baptized when I was like, 6 or 7 years old, but it was never really real, and I've been trying to rededicate something that was never really there to start with. And he got saved, and I led the boy to the Lord that morning, and we set up to baptize him the next Sunday. So I'm talking to his mom. Now, his parents are members of the church. He was a member of the church, And I'm talking to his mom, and I said, I guess you're excited. His name was Darren. I said, I guess you're excited that Darren's going to get baptized next Sunday. She said, not really. I said, not really? What do you mean? She said, well, his daddy baptized him when he was just a little boy. And that's one of my most precious memories from his childhood. And now somebody else is going to baptize him. And I'm thinking, Your kid who was lost and headed for hell just got saved, and all you can think about is Daddy ain't gonna get to baptize him. So religion can sometimes get in the way of the gospel as well, and social as well. I mean, loss of friends, you know, um, um, shunned by family. I mean, and it happens, and it can happen, um, in America or other countries as well. So, questions on those verses? All right, the riot is about to break out. You ready? All right, here we go. Verse 28. When they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." So the whole city was filled with confusion and rushed into the theater with one accord, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's traveling companions. Then Paul wanted to go into the people. The disciples would not allow him, and some of the officials of Asia who were his friends sent to him, pleading that he would not venture into the theater. Some therefore cried one thing, some another, for the assembly was confused. Most of them did not know why they had come together. Isn't that just like people? We got a riot going on, and most of them don't even know why they're there. That's like most of the riots today, I think. Most people just see a crowd and jump in the middle, and they don't even know why they're there. They drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward, and Alexander motioned with his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people, but when they found out that he was a Jew, all with one voice they cried out for about 2 hours, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." So we've got quite a mess going on here in Ephesus that Paul is smack dab in the middle of it. Apparently the silversmiths start the riot in town, and it kind of spills over into the theater area where you got the whole town gathered together. Most of them don't even know why they're there. They're just chanting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Great is Diana of the Ephesians." Throw this next picture up here. This is a picture of the theater in Ephesus. This is where the riot would have taken place. If you look there at the bottom of the screen, there's an Ephesian. She looks like she's ready to riot right there. She looks mean and ornery. But anyway, this would have been the riot, and Paul, he's urged by his friends, don't go in there. Bad things will happen to you if you go in there. But he ends up in there anyway. Let's see the next picture. This is just another angle of it. That's from the floor. You can see it's a large thing. It would have held many people. And so this is a huge deal. You got the whole city in an uproar, basically. Okay, so why do you think Paul wanted to appear before the crowd? There you go. He wanted a chance to preach. Paul always took every opportunity to appear before a crowd of people. And when Paul says he's going to make his defense, what is his defense? It's the gospel. He just preaches Jesus. Now the Jews, in an effort to try to quell this, they put forth Alexander. Why do you think that they wanted to do that? He's going to be their spokesman, but why were they wanting to get their say in there? Okay, think about it for a minute. Ephesus, is that a Jewish city? It's a Greek city. It's a Gentile city. So, the Jews are worried that whatever they're stirred up about with Paul, and he's preaching a Jewish Messiah, that somehow or another that might get linked to the Jews, and that might make things hard on them. And so they want Alexander to kind of be their spokesperson and say, "Hey, we're not with him." Is basically the idea that Paul is on his own. We're not with him. He's talking about something that we don't buy into. He's talking about this Jesus, and we don't buy into that. But the crowd, once they found out Alexander was a Jew, they would have none of it. Why? Well, probably they associated him with Paul. Paul's a Jew. He's preaching a Jewish Messiah. This guy's a Jew. He must be with Paul, and they lump them all together because right then all they wanted to hear was how great Artemis was. How great is Diana? They don't want to hear about how great the Jewish God is. They don't want to hear about how great the Jewish Messiah is. All they want to hear about is how great Diana is. And so you've got this mob mentality going on here. That's where people often get hurt. And I think that's what the people were worried about with Paul, is that Paul, don't go in there. Don't go in there. You're going to get yourself hurt. But Paul isn't going to do that, and he ends up in the middle of the crowd nonetheless. Verse 35, when the city clerk had quieted the crowd, and remember they had yelled for 2 hours, so it wasn't a quick thing that he got them quieted down. When the city clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, "Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple guardian of the great goddess Diana and the image which fell down from Zeus? Therefore, since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rashly. For you have brought these men here who are neither robbers of temples nor blasphemers of your goddess. Therefore, if Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a case against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you have any other inquiry to make, it shall be determined in the lawful assembly, for we are in danger of being called in question for today's uproar, there being no reason which we may give to account for this disorderly gathering." And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly. So basically, the city clerk comes. He gets everybody quieted finally. He said, "Look, we're part of Rome, and if we get if it's found out that we're rioting, bad things can happen. Rome can come and do bad things to us. So let's handle this in a legal way. The courts are open. If Demetrius and his working companions have a case against these men, let him take them to court over it. Or if there's some other issue to be solved, let it be done legally in a court of law. But if we keep on like this, then Rome is going to come and it's not going to be good for us." He says, who out there doesn't know that Ephesus is the guardian of the temple of Artemis or Diana, and the great image that fell from Zeus? Now, they believed that the great image of Artemis fell from the sky, because from Zeus in heaven. What do you think that might have been? If it wasn't completely made up, which it could have been, but if it was something that was real, what do you think it might have been? Well, a tornado, except I'm not sure they have a lot of those in there. A meteor. I think, a lot of scholars think that maybe what happened was a meteor fell from the sky. They're ancient people. They don't know what it is, and they see this thing falling from the sky. It's probably burning. It's bright. Oh, it must be from the gods. And so it becomes the image that fell from heaven. Why was the clerk so concerned with the crowd being charged with insurrection? Well, as I said, the Romans could take away their freedom. And with that, what also goes away for this fellow? His job, yeah. And so he had a vested interest in it, because if Rome comes and takes our power away, they take my power away. So It's getting a little too close to my own doorstep, as the idea there. And so that kind of is where that ends up. That's kind of the exclamation point at the end of Paul's ministry at Ephesus, and then next time we'll see him move on as he treks towards Jerusalem and ultimately Rome. Any questions or comments on the lesson tonight or the verses that we talked about? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You, when you reject the truth and you buy into the lie, it just gets ridiculous after a point. What the lie that we believe is, it just gets plumb ridiculous after a while, as you see here. I look at that statue of Artemis and I go, why in the world would you worship that? That's no god or no goddess. But if I grew up in that culture and that's all I was ever taught, maybe I would have. And so you begin to see how dark the darkness was and what power the gospel had when men like Paul went and preached, hey, there is a real God with real answers who really loves you and sent his son who really died on the cross for real and was buried and rose again. You can see the power of the gospel in this world of darkness that these people lived. All right, I've got a video. I don't know, I think it's maybe 7 or 8 minutes long, where